On January 20th, 2025, the nation watched as Donald Trump, once again in the Oval Office, signed an executive order. This was no ordinary decree. Trump declared a national emergency at the U.S. southern border. Citing an unprecedented influx of migrants, he painted a picture of chaos and lawlessness. But buried within the order was a provision that sent chills down the spines of many Americans: the potential invocation of the Insurrection Act of 1807. This act, with its roots in early American history, grants the president sweeping powers to deploy military forces within the United States. Trump's order didn't immediately deploy troops. Instead, it started a 90-day countdown. By April 20th, 2025, a joint report from the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of Homeland Security was due on his desk. This report, according to the order, needed to assess the situation at the border and recommend further actions. The clock was ticking. The nation, still bearing the scars of the January 6th Capitol riot and Trump's first term, held its breath. The specter of military intervention in civilian life loomed large. The executive order, light on specifics and heavy on rhetoric, only fueled anxieties. What exactly constituted an invasion at the border? What criteria would trigger the use of the Insurrection Act? The order remained ominously silent. News outlets buzzed with analysis, legal experts debated the constitutionality of such a move, and social media erupted with a mix of fear and fury. The date, April 20th, became a grim marker in the national consciousness. It represented a potential turning point, a day when the line between military power and civilian governance could be blurred, or perhaps even erased. The Insurrection Act of 1807. Even the name sounds archaic, conjuring up images of a bygone era. Yet this law, passed during Thomas Jefferson's presidency, remains a potent and controversial tool in the hands of the executive branch. In essence, the Insurrection Act empowers the President of the United States to deploy the military, including the National Guard, within the nation's borders. It allows for the use of military might not against foreign enemies, but against American citizens. But the act is not a blank check for presidential power. It outlines specific circumstances under which it can be invoked. These include instances of insurrection, domestic violence, and situations where state authorities are unable to enforce federal law. The act, in theory, acts as a safeguard against anarchy, a last resort when civilian institutions crumble. The Insurrection Act stands in stark contrast to martial law, a term often used but frequently misunderstood. Martial law represents the complete breakdown of civilian government, with the military assuming control over all aspects of administration, including law enforcement and the judiciary. The Insurrection Act, on the other hand, does not dissolve civilian authority. It merely provides military support to existing law enforcement agencies. Throughout American history, the Insurrection Act has been invoked sparingly, often in times of profound social and political unrest. From the Whiskey Rebellion of the 1790s to the desegregation of schools in the American South, the act has cast a long shadow, a reminder of the potential for military intervention in civilian life. However, its use has often been accompanied by controversy, raising questions about executive overreach and the delicate balance of power in a democracy. The Insurrection Act of 1807, for all its historical significance, has not escaped the scrutiny of legal scholars and civil liberties advocates. In the 21st century, many argue that this relic of a bygone era is dangerously outdated, its language too vague, its potential for abuse too great. At the heart of the criticism lies the act's ambiguity. What exactly constitutes an insurrection? What level of domestic violence warrants military intervention? The act provides no clear definitions, leaving these crucial judgments to the discretion of the president. This lack of clarity, critics argue, creates a dangerous precedent, potentially giving unchecked power to the executive branch during times of crisis. The Brennan Center for Justice, a leading legal think tank, has been particularly vocal in its condemnation of the Insurrection Act. They argue that its vague language and lack of oversight mechanisms make it ripe for misuse. The center points to historical instances where the act was used not to quell actual insurrections, but to suppress dissent and target marginalized communities. Furthermore, the act's critics point to the potential for militarizing domestic law enforcement. Deploying troops on American soil, they argue, can escalate tensions, erode trust in civilian institutions, and lead to unnecessary violence. The specter of soldiers patrolling streets, once unthinkable in the United States, becomes a chilling possibility when the Insurrection Act is invoked. The debate over the Insurrection Act is not merely academic. It strikes at the heart of American democracy, raising fundamental questions about the role of the military, the limits of presidential power, and the delicate balance between security and liberty. Section 4. A Nation on Edge speculation mounts as the deadline nears. As April 20, 2025 drew nearer, a palpable sense of unease gripped the nation. Trump, true to form, remained characteristically vague about his intentions. Public pronouncements oscillated between ominous warnings about the border crisis and cryptic pronouncements about the need for law and order. The joint report from the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of Homeland Security, a document that held the potential to clarify the situation, remained shrouded in secrecy. Adding to the uncertainty were reports of troop movements along the southern border. The Department of Defense, citing heightened security concerns, announced the deployment of 1,500 active duty personnel, along with additional resources, to the region. This move, while presented as a precautionary measure, did little to quell the growing anxiety. Rumors swirled of tent cities being erected, of detention centers being expanded, of a government preparing for a massive crackdown. Then came the bombshell. In a late-night tweet, Trump announced his intention to house up to 30,000 criminal migrants at Guantanamo Bay, the infamous detention camp in Cuba. This declaration, met with immediate condemnation from human rights groups, seemed to confirm the worst fears of many Americans. Was this the beginning of a slippery slope, a descent into authoritarianism? The speculation reached fever pitch. News outlets ran wall-to-wall coverage, pundits offered their predictions, and social media became a breeding ground for both fear-mongering and frantic calls to action. The question on everyone's mind was simple yet terrifying. Would Trump cross the Rubicon and invoke the Insurrection Act? The answer, it seemed, lay hidden in the heart of a president known for his unpredictability. The nation, on edge and holding its breath, waited for April 20th.
Know you've been a good friend.
Don't forget to subscribe, share, and like this video. It only takes a few seconds, but it means a lot to us and helps us create more informative content like this for you.